Hello, I'm Jonathan Charles, and this is Pocket Dilemmas, where Kerrie, Laura and I tackle political and economic questions which are facing the world today.
What are pocket dilemmas?
Are algorithms biased?
Will robots take away your job?
Do you trust cryptocurrencies?
How do we bridge the pay gap?
What is the future of poverty?
This is Dilemmas at EBRD.com.
You know, a euro today is a euro tomorrow. Its value is stable. The value of Bitcoin oscillates wildly. Of all things, I would not call Bitcoin a currency for this reason, but also for another reason. The euro is backed by the European Central Bank. The dollar is backed by the Federal Reserve. Currencies are backed by the central banks or their governments. Nobody backs the Bitcoin.
Well, you were just hearing there Mario Draghi, the head of the European Central Bank. Will the euro today be the euro tomorrow? He seems to think so. Should we put all of our trust in the currencies that we know? Dollars, the euro, the pound, even with all those financial crises out there, Brexit, trade wars, which may or may not be happening. Well, let's tackle what Mario Draghi seems to be suggesting there. Let's explore that question. The real currencies that we've been used to so long, or the cryptocurrencies? So our dilemma today, what is the future of money? Is crypto a miracle or a mirage? Plastic, paper, tokens, what is it all worth?
Exactly, Jonathan. So, in my own life, I just recently got married.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And so we're in that fun process, and I say that
it's an expensive
joking. Very expensive, also really confusing. And so my husband and I are kind of combining our portfolios and trying to figure out...
That's what modern young people do today. They combine their portfolios.
Very responsible of us.
Yes.
So we're trying to figure out not only what to invest in, but where to invest. And now we're trying to also think, like, what currency we should maybe put some of this money in. And we're quite young, so we can tolerate some of this risk. And I briefly, and very silently, because my husband would not go for it, briefly contemplated, what about something like Bitcoin? Should I throw some money, at Bitcoin? Because there have been big gains, but also some losses. But there's no way he would go for it, so I didn't even mention it. But
I presume you want to stay married. So.
Yeah, exactly. So it's risky. And there's this great example of, pizzas. So in 2010, this guy tried to figure out, okay, is this really going to work? Can I really buy something tangible with this Bitcoin? And so he started buying these 10,000 Bitcoin pizzas. Guess how much they're worth today?
How much?
Each 10,000 Bitcoin pizza is worth approximately $12 million.
I can see the pizza maker disappearing off into the sunset, singing and retiring, probably.
Exactly.
So apart from that, there are lots of other examples, aren't there, of cryptocurrencies out there and crypto lands which have cryptocurrencies.
Yeah. So have you heard actually of a land called Liberland?
No.
Okay. Well, listen to this clip.
My honor is to introduce you to Liberland, one of the smallest countries, yet a country based on principles of liberty. We founded Liberland only 3 years ago, and we already have 500,000 people that applied for citizenship. And our task is nothing smaller than to utilize the latest blockchain technologies in order to build a truly free society.
So this was Vít Jedlička, the president of Liberland. It's a micronation whose official currency is actually Bitcoin. So it's this small piece of disputed territory on the western bank of the Danube between Croatia and Serbia.
Just let me remind you, by the way, you are listening to Pocket Dilemmas, the podcast which explores the political and economic problems which are shaping our world. You can review us on iTunes. Email us at dilemmas@ebrd.com. Follow us on Twitter, of course, and the handle is @EBRD. That dilemma today, what is the future of money? Is crypto a miracle or a mirage? Plastic, paper, tokens, what's it all worth? We do have some guests. Stuart Trow from our own treasury here at the EBRD. And guest number 2 today is Zeynep Gurguc, a research associate at Imperial College in London, the business school there. So what's your quick take, your headline take on these issues? Stuart, you go first.
Okay, thank you. Well, cryptocurrencies are certainly a fascinating and, to an extent, a natural development from the internet. And to that extent, they've probably got as much a claim to legitimacy as any other currency around at the moment. But
that's not saying much, of course.
No, exactly. But and with that in mind, whether they will actually last is clearly a concern. But I think the main thing to take away from that, though, is that the blockchain technology that underlines it is going to be something that will last robust and has already had practical applications.
I also agree that for me the more interesting part is the technology behind cryptocurrencies and the ideology and concepts behind it. And obviously nobody knows whether cryptocurrencies will last, and I'm a very risk-averse individual myself personally, but I'm fascinated by the technology, and I'm trying to see how this can improve actually existing systems and how this can make a difference to the world. And for me, it's not an either or question. It's more how could we coexist.
This is Pocket Dilemmas, the podcast which explores the political and economic problems shaping our world. Review us on iTunes, email us at dilemmas@ebrd.com, follow us on Twitter @EBRD.
What I've seen or reading and hearing is that it's definitely those economies where the trust might not be very much present among the investors. So they're trying to just find the ways of getting hedged or diversified their risk of specific currency.
So this was Urmas Peiker, the founder of Funderbeam, from one of the EBRD countries of operation, Estonia, the world's first startup marketplace powered by blockchain.
Yeah, and he told us that he sees crypto being used more in countries with lower levels of trust in the official financial system or where local currencies are underdeveloped. He also explained how he sees the future of crypto.
Despite the fact that we are using blockchain and we're one of the first who actually showed that it can be used for other than actually exchanging the currency or crypto assets. So we use that and still using it for securities, which now actually is becoming a major trend. But if you look at the ICOs, so these are the initial coin offerings, and why the boom is now over, one of the reasons obviously is that regulators woke up at some point and realized that, okay, guys, but you're dealing with securities. So what you are promising here is actually underlying right to the company. And although very much jurisdictions may regulate differently, but nevertheless. And another aspect which took quite some time for the regulators to understand is that if those ICOs issues were actually listed on one of the crypto exchanges and were tradable, then those exchanges should have actually had also a securities trading license themselves. So because they're not anymore dealing with some alternative cryptocurrencies, but it's actually securities, which is very much regulated industry.
Well, we've got Stuart Trow with us from our own treasury here at the EBRD. Stuart, what do you think? Is crypto a useful financial tool? Obviously a new one, or is it another bubble? Is it going to go away?
It's potentially useful, but it's got to overcome, as I say, 4 hurdles really. One is that it's got to be scalable, because at the moment cryptocurrencies are a very small part of the global financial system. The other is to get on top of the cost of doing transactions, because they're actually quite high. And as Kerrie was saying about the pizza example back in 2010, the cost of buying a pizza using a cryptocurrency these days could easily be more than the cost of the pizza itself. So obviously that has to be addressed. Also, the commercial relevance. Businesses have got to see that it's worth their while going to the trouble to set themselves up to be able to trade and accept Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. And the final element is commonality to all currencies, trust.
So the point that Urmas raised about the strengthening of local currencies, why is this important?
The role I see more for Bitcoin and blockchain technology in smaller, less developed financial countries is to actually help them to jump a generation in technology. So where there isn't an established banking system, this can help them sort of come to the party, if you like, and get more people banked, more people involved in the system, in much the same way as you saw with sort of telecommunications, that, you know, countries where there weren't hard wire, copper wire telephone systems, they were able to jump a generation with mobile technology.
We see lots of rocketing around in the trust in these cryptocurrencies on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I certainly remember a few months ago reading papers saying at one moment it was a record high, for example, with Bitcoin.
Yeah. The
next moment it seemed to have collapsed.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I mean, you only have to sort of follow the headlines, the latest raid on Bitcoin exchanges and people having their wallets ripped off or what have you, to and you do see the value of Bitcoin responding very quickly to those sort of incidents as well.
Exactly. I came across this fascinating article about how Bitcoin really got all this notoriety. And it talked about how when WikiLeaks when they released all those documents in 2010 from the Iraq War, a bunch of people were really supportive of that. And PayPal was funding WikiLeaks. And then, of course, the U.S. government, shut that down, or at least encouraged PayPal to freeze all their accounts. And then naturally, in the cryptosphere, you had people asking, well, why not Bitcoin? Why can't Bitcoin then fund something like WikiLeaks? And actually behind the scenes, the founders of Bitcoin were saying, no, please leave us alone. We are not ready for all this scrutiny. And then obviously the train had left the station, and we are where we are today, where Bitcoin has funded things like Silk Road and other nefarious purposes. But I think about what would have happened if Bitcoin would have funded something that was more mainstream. I mean, something actually really positive could have come of it.
The technological advantages of the currencies, the fact that if you buy something the other side of the world, it can be settled virtually immediately, that's a major plus. And, even if none of the current altcoins or Bitcoins survive the test to commercial reality, the technology, the advancement in financial transactions almost certainly will survive that.
Do we see real investors, institutional investors, investing in cryptocurrencies? Because that's a big test, isn't it, of whether these things stand their value?
Yes, and that's the acid test, if you like, because at the moment, from a regulatory perspective, it is quite difficult for institutions to get involved. Very few of them, if any, I can think of, that can actually buy Bitcoin directly. They're more forced to look at alternatives, say like investing in investment trusts that themselves invest in Bitcoin. So very few can deal directly in Bitcoin.
So we're the first generation, born in the 80s, that we won't be as wealthy as our parents, or at least that's what stats say. And it's, for many reasons, but one, because wages haven't really kept up with inflation. And of course, this is just a Western example. In the East, it's actually different. I can see that people lose faith in the government controlling these currencies and just in monetary policy in general. Governments make money from inflation, and people like me and my generation were seeming to maybe lose out. So, what should we do about monetary policy and equality? And could something like the blockchain and Bitcoin maybe help?
Well, I think the major problem with the fiat currencies, the dollar, the euro, the pound, everything we're used to in that respect, is the perceived lack of fairness. And I guess you were alluding to that when you were talking about monetary policy. For example, I'm a gentleman of a certain age, and I've had a chance to build assets, and I've got a house and a mortgage and what have you. And the current easy monetary policy conditions have been brilliant for me. My house has gone up in value multiple times, and the cost of my mortgage has fallen a lot. And with younger generations never having to being able to to benefit and build wealth in the same way, obviously there's a perceived lack of fairness then. And if that's associated with the fiat currencies, Bitcoin as an alternative could be attractive for younger generations.
Here next to me is Zeynep Gurguc, a research associate at Imperial College London Business School. So Zeynep, crypto could in theory replace currency, as currency is just a social agreement of trust, right?
Yeah, for me, any money is now just a coordination game and a trust game. So what I mean by that is that if we all believe that there is value in something, and we all agree that it's a good medium of exchange and that it will be able to store value, and we can measure it as a unit of account, use it as a unit of account, then it can be money. Now, there's nothing conceptually stopping cryptocurrencies for being able to perform these actions. There's conceptually nothing wrong if we all decide that that's really the case. Now, fiat currencies are not that different, actually, right now, because they are not necessarily backed by anything other than the central bank. And if you trust the central bank, of course, you trust the fiat currencies. But if you are in a country in which you now do not trust your central bank or your government anymore, then the fiat currency in that country is not that necessarily that different than cryptocurrency, and it provides a really good alternative for citizens of countries like that.
It's much harder, isn't it, though, Zeynep, to trust something you cannot see? And if I think back to the history of money, originally, for example, certainly under the Bretton Woods Agreement was all backed by gold. You could actually go and visit the gold and make sure it was backing the currency. With existing currencies these days, as I say, I can physically see it. The difficulty with all these cryptocurrencies, it's quite a leap of faith to trust something that exists on a computer system and that actually could easily be wiped from that system. Then what?
But most of our money actually, thanks to millennials as well, that happens in a digital form. Happens in a digital form. So in the sense that, for the new generation, there isn't that concept of it does not exist, I don't hold it, so I'm not going to be able to use it. I mean, you go to a shop and if there's a millennial in the shop as a shop assistant and you give them some coins, you just get really weird looks rather than, why aren't you using your payment your phone or your
If you're going to have a cryptocurrency, you need to have this digital ledger, is that right?
Yeah, you need to have this distributed ledger. So you have to keep the record of transactions in a distributed manner.
So in very simple terms, just so I understand it, in the old days it would be like going to visit a big book in which was written in the book, which everyone could agree, the current state of an account, for example. So you know that what's written in the book is a true account of what exists. Is that really a digital version of that?
Yes, it's a digital and a distributed version of that. So, I mean, we all use Google Sheets, right? Mm-hmm. We have a transaction of records and we can all, update it on live terms, that it's done, and then you cannot really change back to the state of the consensus.
Okay. In theory?
In theory.
Okay, but presumably it's also open to fraud as well, just as any system is open to fraud. Of
course, I mean, everything is it can be fraud, it's open to hacking, it's open to different things, but it's actually one of the most resilient and secure ways of keeping data so far. Okay. So in that sense, it's more resilient than other systems.
So question to both of you. If you had to make a case for crypto, what would it be? And Zeynep, let's start with you.
So, two things. For me, it really offers an alternative for those countries that did not have any kind of form of trust, and then they decide to control the system themselves. But more promising, actually, for me, is the second aspect, is what it can do for micropayments and what it can do for industries or countries where micropayments are very important and very useful. For example, in content creation industries, right? So we have these content creation that happens we read a nice article, we listen to some music, and we really don't want to enter our credit card information for every single cent that we want to send it to someone. And because of that, we don't end up sending this money. But if we can actually have a very scalable and very good system that this facilitates this, then we can redistribute wealth and resources in a much better way. So this is very promising for me. The second thing is micropayments are very important in certain continents, right? So, for example, in Africa, people didn't have bank accounts, and then when M-Pesa came, it revolutionized the whole continent, right? Especially obviously Kenya. And when M-Pesa came, it decreased transaction costs so much that it's really helped communities around there. Now cryptocurrencies, or the technology behind it, offers a new alternative. People are working on it, and that's the real true potential for it. So.
Absolutely. And it's especially since, in a developing country, more people have phones than they have bank accounts. Exactly. So this is also why it's really prolific. Stuart, what about you?
But let me sort of perhaps look at the sort of more developed world aspects to this, because to be honest, going forward, I'd be gobsmacked if global central banks didn't adopt a lot of the technologies behind Bitcoin and alt currencies, and because the direction of travel of fiat currencies has been to try to put transactions more and more on the system. So we use a lot less cash now, notes and coins, than we used to, and that's kind of brought microtransactions into the realm of digitization, if you like. And at the same time, we've had the pushback against very large denomination notes, sort of like the 500 euro note is they're going to stop production of that in April, I think. And long ago, the Americans decided it wasn't worth having a $1,000 bill because of all the nefarious activities associated with that. So we've got this direct flow, if you like, towards every transaction we do being on record, and cryptocurrencies are just a natural extension of that.
Pretty interesting. All right, a quick reminder, by the way, of our dilemma today. What is the future of money? Is crypto a miracle or a mirage? Plastic, paper tokens, what's it all worth? It looks to me as though the world is going in a certain direction, but we'll see.
Well, I think first of all, we have to understand that blockchain is just one of the tools in our technology toolbox. So the key question you should be asking to determine whether blockchain is a useful solution to your problem is, first of all, do you need to store data at all? If not, you should explore other alternatives. Blockchain will not be useful in that case.
So that was Jelena Madir, our chief counsel and main expert on blockchain. She explained kind of what you need to consider before you choose to use blockchain.
I think blockchain is most likely to deliver significant value in situations involving business needs that require reconciliation of data. So let me give you an example. In trade finance transactions, you have many stakeholders participating, such as exporter, importer, banks. In addition, blockchain is also likely to deliver value in situations that require auditability. And what I mean by this is where record keeping of immutable records is required. For example, it could be used in food safety, in tracing food from its origin to your plate. And since blockchain data is immutable, you'd be able to trace the transport of food products from their origin to the supermarket. Another area where auditability is required is voting. So blockchain offers the ability to vote digitally, but it's transparent enough that any regulators would be able to see if something were changed on the network.
Yeah, blockchain, we were talking about it just a few minutes ago. It really is a buzzword in technology right now. And we've been exploring a little bit why cryptocurrencies and blockchain go so closely together. So just, I guess, to the two of you, I mean, it's hard to have one without the other. If you're going to have a cryptocurrency, you need to have this digital ledger. Is that right?
Yeah, you need to have this distributed ledger. So you have to keep the record of transactions in a distributed manner.
What is the real difference between that digital distributed ledger and, for example, me going on an app into my bank account, which surely is also a ledger which I've agreed with my bank is the true state of affairs? How does it really differ from the old-fashioned ledger just distributed in that way?
You don't keep the information in one server. You keep the information in a very, all around the globe and different nodes, and then it becomes much more resilient and much more secure. And plus, it makes, if you trust your bank, great. But then if something goes bad with the bank, this basically like a one-way trust, whereas this one creates this type of distributed trust and a multi-dimensional trust in the system. And that's why it's different.
Well, I think the thing about perhaps the way to look at it is that at the moment we're trying to replicate with blockchain and digital currencies stuff we already do. And perhaps the way we ought to be looking at it is sort of like the internet, for example. With the internet, it's not just a means of communication like a telephone or something. It's actually spawned things that we didn't used to do before. Social media is the most obvious example, but there are much more subtle ways we've been able to, buying software and stuff like that. You can just download it now. You don't have to do anything weird and wonderful in that respect. So basically with blockchain and whether cryptocurrencies are part of this revolution, they really need a sort of killer app, something to sort of make it relevant to users and to commercial interests as well.
So more and more, as people start to use blockchain, there's concerns about legal aspects and cornering of the market. And there was this great study actually put out by Princeton in 2018 that actually said over 80% of mining, so Bitcoin mining, is controlled by 6 actors, 5 of which are in China. Now, when you look at Bitcoin mining, I guess let me explain that for a second. So Bitcoin mining, it's people all around the world, as you said, Zeynep, who have computers who mine for Bitcoins, which means they validate transactions. And every successful transaction, it adds a block to the blockchain. So you have 80% of the mining happening with 6 actors, 5 of which are in China. Wouldn't that kind of indicate that China has kind of cornered the market? Is this also a concern?
Yes, with proof of work, that's what happens with mining. So you have different types of governance mechanisms in blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, and Bitcoin works on proof of work. And now people are coming up with new governance mechanisms. So it doesn't necessarily have to be proof of work. It could be something else. There are like a lot of new mechanisms that are being discussed.
Is there a
that
governance
could
issue
resolve,
here?
like that could potentially resolve this?
Yes. Is there, because I mean, if I think about traditional currencies, there are always governance issues. A government doesn't have enough money, they print money, you get inflation. What's the Bitcoin equivalent of that? You make more Bitcoins, you can flood the market. Is that a governance issue around
Actually, I would say for any kind of cryptocurrency or blockchain or tokens in general, this concept we call tokenomics, the main issue of 2019 is going to be governance. And, there are really new solutions that, obviously uses game theory that says, okay, like by using reputation or by making sure, we look at like which kind of staking you put into the system, you can vote and you can govern. You have these like self-management systems, but people are still exploring. There is not like one perfect answer yet.
Stuart, what are your thoughts?
A lot of these cross-border issues have already been raised with companies like Amazon and Google. It's proving incredibly difficult to nail them down, just in terms of tax, let alone sort of privacy regulation and stuff like that. And there's always the suspicion that privacy regulation is part of a sort of a darker trade war as well, if you like, because Europe isn't especially hasn't got the scale that perhaps the US and Chinese tech giants have got, that they're more interested in privacy for that reason. The other issue about the governance is specifically of Bitcoin, it's very much a 51% situation. If you control 51% of the Bitcoin out there, you can effectively change the rules.
The story of economic life. Let me remind you, you're listening to Pocket Dilemmas, the podcast which explores the political and economic problems which are shaping our world. Review us on iTunes, email us at dilemmas@ebrd.com. Follow us on Twitter, of course, our handle @EBRD. So now let's try and draw this discussion to a conclusion. Our dilemma, if you remember, what is the future of money? Is cryptocurrencies, are they a miracle or a mirage? What about real money? What's it all worth? So let's try now to get that conclusion about the future. Zeynep, let me start with you. How do you see the future? What's your conclusion in this debate?
My conclusion is that the technology is very valuable, and I think even central banks are going to use this technology eventually. At least in a way that suits them. And it's going to be very important for certain sectors or certain countries where micropayments are very important.
Stuart, do you agree? What's the future? And, what's your conclusion from this conversation?
To an extent, there's excitement around sort of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies because almost like they're a subculture type thing and they're sort of free and independent and all the rest of it. But I think eventually they'll find themselves subsumed into the mainstream. And, as we were saying earlier, I'd be really surprised if the central banks don't see some advantages to themselves of being able to track all our movements a bit more closely by having more financial transactions actually within the system.
So, Kerrie, we've had quite a long chat about this, and I think it's a generational thing. That's what I've concluded, that I think your generation is much more inclined to trust cryptocurrencies than mine. I still like the physical knowledge of physical money.
I mean, I do too. I love having some cash in my pocket. But as we kind of discussed, most of my transactions are done online anyway. So maybe it is a generational thing. I don't know. Is all I can take away from this conversation is that I am still no clearer on an investment plan of where I should put my money, if it should be maybe some of it in crypto, some of it not in crypto. But I have faith that our generation will figure it out.
Well, somebody's got to figure it out. Thank you very much to our guests, to Zeynep, to Stuart. Thank you as well to all of you for listening. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
This podcast was brought to you by the EBRD. We'll be back soon with a new episode. In the meantime, send us your feedback, suggestions and ideas on dilemmas@ebrd.com. And remember, reviewing and rating us helps others to find us. Until next time.